welcome to Creative Block. I'm your host, V. I interview people in creative industries about their life, work, and hobbies while we doodle jam. I asked people on Twitter if they had specific topics they wanted us to discuss, as well as some drawing prompts. And today with us, we have Marion Bordeyne. Hi!
Hi.
So, how do you pronounce your name for English speakers?
Oh, that's a good question. That's also how every interview starts with an American
Yes!
studio. Um, I like it pronounced Marion, but
Mhm.
honestly, I this is what I end up saying every time. I really don't mind like pronunciations. I don't think it doesn't matter that much to me, but let's go with Marion.
Yeah, I like to, I don't know, it's funny. Someone like recently was like, Creative Block always starts with the host trying to figure out how to pronounce the name of the guest. So now I have to keep this a tradition. You and I, we met back when we were in France. We started at a studio. We met at a studio named Gaumont. They have an office here now in LA, I think. And so I was doing development work at the time, and you were your lead color design on backgrounds, right? On the
Yeah,
TV show?
yeah. I was a BG lead on a TV show called Belle and Sebastian. I think they kept the name for the English version, and yeah, I was doing color. It was yeah.
It's a beautiful show, by the way. If anyone is ever curious about French animation, like it's like one of these like big franchises um that were like, it was anime, right? Before, like it was
Hmm.
like the Japanese studios who did all these like yeah, Belle and Sebastian, all these like European stories, like sagas. I don't know how to
Yeah.
describe it. Like very I think I talked about it in a little bit in an episode with, I think it was Chloe maybe. But it's really interesting. It's like these, it's usually very like cottagecore. It's like, oh, Ghibli did like a lot of these as
Yeah.
well. It's like, oh, they're all like in their little outfits. But before you worked on that, you also worked at this like really like boutique studio in Germany.
Yeah, I did. So yeah, I started my career a little bit backwards in a sense because right out of college, when I graduated animation school in France, I ended up finding this gig at a studio in Germany called Studio Soy. They made, I believe their biggest project was the Gruffalo, which was like a really lovely claymation, but it was actually done in CG project. Or wait,
Yeah,
some of it
that
was
won a lot
claymation.
of, yeah, a lot of it won a lot of awards. I remember it went like it did really well.
Yeah, I think so, right? And it was really gorgeous animation. Like I saw the sets, they had like this big um kind of I don't know the word for it in English, which means it's just like a big room full of like their old sets and stuff, and they had kept them pristine. So it's
Oh
really
wow.
lovely. But yeah, so I ended up being a production designer slash art director on a TV series there, like a CG TV series, and I stayed there for about a year and a half. And after that, I moved back to France because I was a little bit homesick.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And that's when we met actually. Like I moved back to France and started at Gaumont, like you were saying, and
Mm.
I was doing color and on Belle and Sebastian, yeah.
It's also pretty crazy that you got like a, so you said it was art director, but you said it was a little bit almost like production designer, right? On that
Yeah,
gig. Yeah.
yeah.
How'd you I'm gonna switch it up, y'all. It's gonna be a little bit of a flashback episode. We're starting a little bit in the future and we're going backwards. How did you land that job from school?
Okay, so I went to an animation school in France which back then was called Supinfocom. I think now it's called Rubica.
Yeah.
It's in the north of France. And back then, I'm not sure that the curriculum stayed the same. I think they updated it quite a bit since I graduated, because that was maybe 10 years ago. But back then, you were supposed to do internships during your fourth and fifth year, because that's the courses that like you graduate after 5 years. And so one of my internships I did at that studio when I was
very cool.
yeah. And so when I was in my last year, like about to graduate and stuff, I was working on my student film. They sent me an email and they're like, "Hey, we really loved having you as an intern. We're looking for someone to art direct this new project that we have. It's an existing IP that was a Danish IP called Rasmus Klump in Danish, I believe. And the German version was called Petsy. And it's like this really beloved little bear character from, I think, the 50s. I don't know, but it's apparently beloved by Germans and Danish people, but I wasn't really aware of it.
It's really funny how there's like these like different like random IPs that are like very popular in some countries, and then you go to another one and it's like, I've never heard of it.
They have an amusement park in Denmark, I think.
Oh really? That's
I was
so
like,
funny.
what? I had never seen this bear ever in my life. Like, it was so funny. Anyway, yeah, they sent me an email asking me if I was interested in art directing it. And, you know, like I was what, 22, 23 at the time. And I was like, oh my God, like you want to do this so bad. It's like, oh, wow, I would start my career with a bang, right?
Yeah, like art directing, yeah.
That's it's a pretty cool job, I thought at the time. And it is, but it's a lot of responsibility, a lot of meetings and stuff. And I think I didn't realize that before I took the job. So I took it, and it was hard work. And I think I was not mature enough to
That's really great that you mentioned that, because I do feel like like I'm not gonna lie, like we've all like wished we could. Here's your best friend, I'm uploading him to the Jamboard.
Oh my gosh.
Anyone to listen.
No.
If anyone's just listening to the episode on Spotify right now, you can tune into the YouTube, because I've been pulling up pictures to kind of illustrate what projects we are talking about. But as I was saying, for when you're a student and you're like presented with a job like that, it's like who's gonna say no, right? Like we all want to like do something like art directing or supervising or like being a creator or like. But there's that side that's not talked about at all in school. It's like all the like meetings and like the convincing of like why you're making all these choices. Yeah, that's crazy. How is it like for you as like fresh out of school doing these meetings, especially and in a culture that is not your culture?
Oh, wow. We're gonna have to unpack all of that, because it's just like there are layers like an onion. So a little bit about me though, because I feel like, I'm 31 now, and again, like when I got this job I was 23, and I was a very different person and a very different artist, because that was my first real job experience, and I was like thrown in and into this world basically. And yeah, back then I was a lot more impatient.
Yeah.
So sitting still in meetings that were sometimes running like 4 hours long, because there were I think 5 different directors on this TV show.
Oh my God.
And I do not know if that's standard or not, by the way, but that was the case on this TV show. And they were all German, all the directors.
Oh,
And
interesting.
yeah, and again, like I'm French, and like you were saying, they are cultural differences between like, Germany, France, the US, Canada. Like we're all like um ex- I would say like giving feedback, receiving feedback, just communicating in general. Like
Yeah.
it's a minefield basically. Um and
Minefield and minefield.
yeah. um it's so it was really difficult for me to just sit there and listen for hours on end, and sometimes we would reach decisions and they would be undone the next day. It's that kind of a process where it's just like,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, let's do this, and then 2 days later is like, actually no, let's back it up and do something else. And I'm someone like, this is still true to this day. I'm someone where like once I've set my mind to something, it's like, yeah, this is the thing, we're doing this. And I rarely look back.
Yeah,
But that's not
yeah,
really something that works with animation as an
yeah.
industry. That's not really how it works. um and so I was frustrated, I think. But again, like I was really young, and I was like, oh, is this really what the job is like? And it is. That's part of your job. Like I think I was mostly frustrated with the fact that because I was in those meetings, I didn't get to draw as
Yeah.
much as I thought I was
Yeah.
gonna be able to. And as someone who like, I genuinely love to draw, that it's just it is a passion. I made it my job, but that's something that I would be doing even if it wasn't my job, I feel like.
Mhm.
And having, not having a lot of time during my day to do it, I ended up, a little bit depressed about it eventually, because this, again, like this spanned over the course of a year and a half, I
Mhm.
think. And the project was taking a little bit longer to come to fruition that
Mm.
uh, we were anticipating. And so eventually, uh, I ended up like telling them, well, this was a really great opportunity, but I kind of felt like I needed to go back to France, or to go back to a job where it would be a little bit more draftsmanship and less
Yeah.
like, how to put that, less telling people what I want to see. And
Yeah, yeah,
you
like
know
a little less political almost, because that's the thing. Is like,
yeah.
I mean, I use the word when on the podcast. I use the word political. I usually mean that it's that you're doing things like convincing or
Yeah.
debating or like trying to figure out what the big boss wants
Mm,
while still taking care of everybody's feelings and making sure that you're um yeah, still being well regarded. You're not uh kind of bumping into other people's egos. Like that's political is kind of like a weird word because it
yeah.
kind of means a lot and doesn't mean a lot, but that's kind of the way I use it. Is like the whole all of the people management and with the different layers of hierarchy that are involved. I feel like that it kind
Yeah.
of englobes it pretty well. Yeah, I feel
And
like it's tough when you're young, especially coming out of art school, because art school they don't teach that at all.
no, they
uh
don't. I mean, the most experience I had with that was the fact that, like during our last year, as I previously mentioned, we were supposed to make a student film. And
mhm.
so I was working with, I think, 4 or 5 other classmates on a film, and I was the one directing it and art directing it, and that was the most experience I had with that. And it's very different to, you know, uh, like play director at school, and
Yeah.
then, in a professional setting, there are like heaps and tons of different things to take into consideration. Um, because yeah, on a TV show there are expectations, and especially on something where it's an existing IP, like say, like um that little bear thing, like Pedzi, like the Danish people were really, I remember a conversation that we had, like a meeting where I had to redesign the main character, Pedzi, little bear. Um, and yeah, if you're looking at the Jamboard, you'll see that the 1950s version kind of looks nothing like a bear. It kind of look, you're like, is that a monkey? Is that what is going on? And so we're like, okay, first we have to figure out how to make this character look like a bear, because it was a preschool show too, so
Yeah.
he needed to be amenable, he needed to be cute. We established really early on that we wanted to make it look a little bit like claymation. um so thinking of that design wise, like I had like ideas of where I wanted to take the character, but I also needed to make the IP owners happy, because again, like I mentioned, they had a whole like amusement park based on this
Yeah.
guy. And so if all of a sudden like the TV show comes out and the bear looks nothing like the original IP, like nothing at all, and then they have all these plushies that are based on like the stuffed toys and everything, they're like based on the original character, and it's like there's nothing quite matching. So they were very worried about that initially, and we kind of like
Mm.
worked with them on that to kind of like establish like a middle ground. um
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, like
yeah.
for characters that are iconic like this, I would say like a character that's similar to this would probably be, I'm trying to think in the US, like well,
uh
I guess all the IPs, like for example, like Hey Arnold, like he's always gonna have a football head, so you
yeah,
can't
yeah,
change
yeah.
that. Like um
Mm.
I'm trying to think if there's like, I want to think of like a character that's from a comic
Well, I mean,
here in the US.
wait.
Like for example, Popeye. Like we
Yeah,
have, yeah.
or
Like,
like the Ninja Turtles or something like that, because weren't they a comic at some point? I don't know, maybe, don't quote me on
and
that.
yeah, and their
Not
face
sure.
don't really look like a turtle, but you have to
Yeah,
keep that. Even though I feel like the designs have changed a lot
they
throughout.
have. That's what
Um,
I'm saying. It's like,
yeah,
originally, like we have this idea, like if you look at the new TV show, they look almost nothing like
that's
the
true.
90s like 2D animated cartoon, right?
Yeah.
But somehow like the identity of the character remains, like you're still looking at those green dudes and like, yeah, that's the turtles that I know and love. um
Yeah. I think also
but
because like the colors were so iconic and there's four of them. I
mm,
feel for something that's from comics. Yeah, it was a comic.
the more you know.
Oh my God, they looked so awful. Anyway, uh
So it was a perfect example.
it was a, I guess with something like Turtles, it's kind of interesting because they were able to like really change the designs, but there are like properties where you can't change the design,
Mm,
like
mm.
Klump. But also, I worked on a Snoopy show, and the
Oh
Charles
yeah.
Schultz Corporation has very, very strict rules, just so that the IP will always stay true to itself.
Mm.
I can I say this online? I think I can because I think it makes sense. Like, if you're like a beloved creator, you don't want your product to end up looking like something completely different from what you originally
Yeah.
intended it to be. So yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, that's really part of the politics in terms of like, yeah, finding it's hard because that little bear does look like a monkey.
It
Uh
does, right? And so we ended up like changing it quite a bit in the end. Like if you look at the CG version right next to it in Jamboard, uh, I hope he looks more like a bear.
yeah.
um, but yeah, we worked on that show for, yeah, like I said, I worked on it for a year and a half, and then um, there were, I wouldn't say there were issues in the production. Well, yeah, there were issues in the productions. Like some of them were out of my control. And eventually, I also experienced my first burnout.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, because
And
I feel like when you're working on something that you have, you're constantly being stop and go,
Yeah,
like,
it's
and
mm,
or like, no, I was just gonna say, like, for the, because the burnout I feel like really comes when you're a little bit stuck, when you can't really
yeah.
do, when
It's
you don't really
also
have
worth
agency.
yeah, it's also worth mentioning that at the time I did not know that I was doing a burnout. I was just severely depressed. Sorry to be a bummer, but I was really, really depressed, and I did not know if it was because I was missing my own country or if it was because I was hitting roadblocks on the project. It was like a whole lot of different things, like kind of just mixing together and creating like this feeling within me where it's just like I need to leave. I need to stop this. But again, like it's worth saying that at the time, because I say this now with the experience that I have, and realizing that that's what was happening back then when I was in it, I felt like a giant failure. I just felt
Mm,
like I was given this golden opportunity and I was spitting on it and I wasn't able to do what I was supposed to be doing. And like, art was the only thing that I was good at. In my mind, that's how I was, feeling.
mm,
Obviously, that did not reflect reality, but I had placed so much of my self worth as a human being
mm,
into art, and like this persona of like the artist, like, oh, this is the thing that I'm good at. This is
mm.
and so I was putting so much pressure on my shoulders, which ultimately didn't, it's
Didn't help. Yeah,
it
it's like,
doesn't
it's just kind of
help.
like a, you're setting yourself up
Yeah,
for a grand old time, a grand old
yeah.
mental health
And so I had a
time. Yeah.
conversation with one well the only other artist on the team, because that's also a thing. It was such a small studio and such a small team that while we had 5 directors on this show, we only had 2 artists to do
That's
like
really
the whole
crazy when you think about it.
pre-production. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is crazy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like it's
That's
a
Europe though. Yeah, there's not a lot of budget,
yeah.
so you have to be like really
Oh my
close.
gosh, I know. And so the only other artist on the team was also we were roommates. And we were both French and we are both coming from the same school. So at least like, I had like um we were talking quite a bit about this, and she had graduated a year before me, so she had had a bit more experience in the field. Her name is Marion, by the way. I don't want to gatekeep names. Um, she has a really interesting career too. Uh, and yeah, anyway, so we're chatting, and it's like I don't know that I can keep doing this, but I feel like I signed a contract. I said that I'm doing this, so I have to see it through, but it's taking a lot longer than I anticipated. I'm exhausted. And I remember her telling me, well, you can stop, right? You can say, well, I don't want to do this anymore, and you can just, find another job. That's allowed. And that's to tell you
Mhm.
how naive I was and how like I didn't know anything about
Mhm.
about anything. I was like, you can do that? Like, oh
Yeah.
wow. Cuz to me, like, again, like I was not an overachiever, but I was both of both of my parents are teachers.
Mhm.
And so from a very young age I was like, okay, you start something, you finish it. You're like, it's just
Yeah.
that was kind of like embedded in my DNA.
Yeah.
And so for me that was just mind blowing, that's this realization that if I wanted to, I could find another job and leave, and there was no shame in that. um
Yeah. I think that's really
and
important.
yeah,
Yeah.
but that being said, like, you can leave, but I also didn't want to leave the because it was such a small team, I didn't want to leave them out
Yeah.
to dry. So like we had a meeting, and I was like, okay, like we just kind of like planned how I was gonna exit. And I was like, I'll find you another art director to take on after me. And so most of the show was art directed, I think, after I left by an artist called Domarine Fox, whose art is absolutely stunning, and she was just fantastic. No, wait, it's sorry, I'm like this.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Oh, haha. The Marine.
yeah. I think
If anyone's like listening to on like iTunes or Spotify, if you want to look up the names, we are like writing them down on the Jamboard on YouTube, so you can find them there.
So yeah, like she was also fairly young when she took on the job, and I think she did a fantastic job. So kudos to her, honestly. She was a lot more mature than I was at the same age. It needs to be said.
I think it's tough though. I feel like these jobs, like, I don't know, like going into a different culture and like having to do all these meetings, like, I don't know, because I'm a little similar to you in that sense when like I've been in Gaumont like development in the very early stages when you have to redo a design a million times for the what's the word for the client. Like, for example, I worked on this show. I can never say the show because everybody thinks I say naughty, but it's called Naughty.
Oh, Naughty. Yeah.
Naughty. And it's like
Noddy.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
It's like, oui in French.
In French, it's like yes. But yeah, like I was one of the final designers to do passes on the main character. Like somebody else did the main character, but I just had to finish like touching up on like the eyes and stuff like that, and the back and forth is driving me insane. They were like, well, now he looks crazy. Well, now he looks like he's cross-eyed.
It's like, chill. It's just a little boy with like a little hat with what's it called?
Like it's a
freaking Belle on it. Yeah. It's like he has a beanie hat and he drives a little yellow cab. Like, just come on. Be real.
Yeah, and it's just like when they look at the designs, because he was facing camera, he was looking straight on in the camera. So that's something that I would tell anyone now: never draw a character looking straight on at the camera if you're like in the very first pass of design, because then people are going to go insane about the eyes. Because that's the thing. They were like, because when someone's looking straight on at the camera, like the eyes like can easily look empty, void, like he's on drugs, like and it's like
especially when you work on like those like like beloved childhood IPs. It's a whole can of worms. And thinking about it, it's kind of funny because you look at cartoons that are being sort of remade in the US, right? You had like Thundercats and like your She-Ra and like all of those like cartoons, and you see like the uproar in Gen Pop about like the redesigns and stuff. And then back in Europe, it's all those like preschool IPs like
that's literally the fucking pose. That was like the fucking drawing. Even in the final, this is in the final from the internet. He looks like he's a little.
Yeah, he's a little
all there.
off. He's like one of my favorite things in America, like when people are talking, is that they usually like to say that they don't quite like something, instead of saying I don't like this or like this is not good, they're gonna be like, it's interesting. Yeah. And and like I always find that so funny, because I get this, I've heard this note in director reviews and like in the US and in Canada stuff. I've heard it so many times, and at first, like coming from France, you're like, oh, it's interesting, like, oh, so it means that there's something interesting. Yeah, it's good. There's something to cling on to here on the design, and I just need to push it further. But most of the time, it
Yeah.
actually means no, no, stop, don't just
Stop
start
doing that.
over. And
It's so funny. That's so true.
right? um okay, yeah, if you want to go
Yeah, we could like
over.
jump into like I think we could kind of like see how you got your first
Oh yeah.
well first how did you decide to move to Canada and how did that happen for you? Because you spent
Oh
a year, I guess, on in France
yeah.
on Belle and Sebastian and then
Yeah, I spent exactly a year on Belle
mm,
and Sebastian, and it was a really good work experience. The art director I was working with, who was also the director, the showrunner, and he had like very specific ideas on like how he wanted the colors of the backgrounds to be painted,
mhm.
and he's just like a lovely, lovely guy. But yeah, so I was working on this for a year and finding out things about myself as an artist too, because so I was still a lead. So again, like following
Mm.
the the I started my career backwards. I went from like production designer to lead
To lead
background color artist. So it's still like I still had a team of BG artists that I had to give feedback to, on top of like painting backgrounds myself. Uh, and I was so run down. And the thing that I figured out about myself as an artist is that I am not great at drawing things clean.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
so when you are a background artist, that is sort of a pre-requirement. Even if you're painting, you need to be clean. Your layers to like, make sense. And so I think I got hired because I did a test for this studio, and they asked me to do like a whole slew of color keys for an episode.
Mm.
And they're like, yeah,
Mhm.
like we like the colors. And that had been something at this point that kept coming back from like, studios like hiring me and whatnot. They always talked about my colors, so I started to feel like a little bit confident. Like it's like, oh, okay, so I guess color is kind of my thing, and that's why I took on that job.
Mhm.
But it's not just color keys. You have to you have to paint a finished background, and that was taking me so long. Like I was able to do it, but it was the last 10% was taking me a while.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
and so I was getting frustrated because when you work in TV, the deadlines are quite tight. Like
Yeah.
that, whether you work in Europe or in America or anywhere else, I think deadlines on TV shows are they're
Yeah.
crazy. Like I'm sorry, they're
Mhm.
just crazy. Like I was supposed to paint like on top of managing a team of like three background artists, so looking at their backgrounds, making sure all of their layers were properly named and like ready to ship off to compositing and stuff. On top of doing that, I was supposed to paint, I think, how many backgrounds was I supposed to paint per week? I think, let's say, to be safe, about five,
Okay. Yeah,
five
that
to
makes sense.
10.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Uh,
That was what I was gonna say. Probably like two backgrounds a day, which is
yeah,
a
and
lot.
you
Yeah.
know, on Belle and Sebastian, it's just like this show is set in a little mountain village, and so they had all these like um sort of like Swiss Alps kind of
Mhm.
farmhouses with like a lot of tiles, a lot of stone and stuff. There's just so much detail to paint over and over. I remember painting tiles like on a roof and just being like, this is oh this is never ending. And so I was we were all getting like worn out. It wasn't just me, like the whole team was just like, oh my god, I can't. um and yeah, the deadlines, like I said, were quite short. We had to deliver, and I remember a meeting with like a producer or a head producer, I can't remember, but he was like, oh, like, you guys need to be faster. You guys need
Oh my God.
to be faster. And I just like, I remember staring, like, just, staring off and just thinking, I don't think we can go any faster than what we've been doing. Like, it's just not feasible. And because it was France, and because the
Yeah.
relationship between, like, the hierarchy in French studios, I would say is a little bit different than in US studios. It's a lot more open, the communication.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And so it's just
Yeah.
like, I just looked at them and
Yeah.
was like, no, man, no, that's
Yeah.
not possible. We can't do this. Like, I
Yeah.
if it were, I would tell you. Like, I'm not fibbing, but we're just literally, like, we're just, everyone's exhausted.
Yeah.
We were working unpaid overtime, by the way, which
Yeah.
is, I'm sure is very common.
Yeah.
In France, because the first thing to transition to, when I moved to Canada, the first thing that I told people from France when I moved is like, oh my God, they have paid overtime here.
Yeah.
I also remember, not to talk about money, but so you asked me how I got to move to Canada. So, to be completely honest, I was not planning on moving to Canada. I just started dating a great guy. Unfortunately, he lived in Canada at the time, and we were both French, and we went to the same school again. But we had, like, long conversations about how, because we were doing long distance. I was like, okay, so what do we do? Like, do you come back to France? Do I go to Canada? Or are we just trying, like, what are options? Because he's an animator. And again, like, I'm more into pre-prod and stuff, and I was starting to hit a wall in France, because a lot of the animation production was TV shows, and like I said, like, the deadlines were a bit unforgiving at times, and I was like, I'm not sure that I'm enjoying this that much. So I was looking, and it's always been my dream to work in Viz Dev, but those are very coveted jobs, and in France, like, Viz Dev on movies is very, very different, I would assume, because I haven't worked in Viz Dev in France. I have plenty of friends who did, but
yeah, there's not that many features.
no.
There's a single studio. There's Illumination MacGuff.
Yeah.
So they do, like, Despicable Me, The Minions, all that, Sing. But I think that's the only one. Sometimes you'll have, like, the odd one out. They'll do, like, Team Toad did a couple.
Well,
features.
it's, if we're talking CG features, sure. There was also, like, the Asterix ones from Mikos.
Yeah, but that's just not that much compared to the US, where there's, like, features coming out all the time.
Yeah, but to back it up a little, and to think about that a little more, there are a lot of films in development in France, like, but they're, again, like, a lot of them are 2D, first of all, 2D animation.
Yeah.
And second, like, the filmmaking process in France and in the US is very different, and a lot of French features are being made with, like, a lot of financial help from the state or the region they're made in. It's like a lot of subvention. It's a whole process that usually makes these movies take, like, a lot longer to come out. But and there's also a thing, is that they're rarely distributed outside of France and Europe, and that's also, like, a big thing. But yeah, so I was thinking about that. I was thinking of my career. I was thinking about, where I wanted to live and where I wanted to take things next. And so I was thinking, well, I am an artist. I could basically draw from anywhere. And I
Mhm.
like, I was 26, 25, 26, something like that at that time. And I
Mhm.
was like, oh, I don't want to settle in France. I want to see the world. I want to try to move while there's still time. There's always time. But
Mhm.
at the time, I was like, oh,
Yeah, there's no
like, there's no
time.
time. There's plenty of time. We're fine. But yeah, so we ended up moving to Vancouver, which is where I still live now. Um, and yeah, so I did a brief stint in graphic design in a studio called Giant Ant in Vancouver. Uh, Found out that graphic design was not for me and it was not my passion.
Mhm.
um, Again, because I don't like to draw clean. And if
Mhm.
you don't draw, like, what was I doing? I did learn a lot though. Every work experience I've had, I've learned a lot about like the process and myself, and it's what I can say about like the different industries that I've worked in is that they're all very collaborative and in a completely different way every time. So
Mm.
it's fascinating to me. Um, because yeah, that's the thing too. Like if like drawing might be something that you do by yourself, but if you're doing it as a job, it's very rarely, except if you're like a freelance illustrator, like very
Mm.
rarely will be the only one to touch something. And by that I mean like for example, when I was working in background paint in France, like the compositing team would just like retouch like colors and stuff, and um things would be changed all the time. So you have to not you have to let go of ownership. You
Yeah.
have to put you set that ego aside. It's not you're not you're not the main character. Is how I would put it. You're not the main character. You're supposed to work as a team. So
Mhm.
you set your ego aside and you look at what's best for the project. I don't know if that's super clear.
I know,
But
I think that makes sense because it's a thing where it's like, yeah, you have to expect that things are gonna like get changed.
mm,
And that
yeah,
like because of the amount of people that are involved in the project.
yeah.
Um,
So moving on from that to uh
yeah, you were
my
like, oh,
first
graphic
gig.
design.
Yeah, my
Yeah,
graphic design. Oof, no,
not for
I was
you.
not good. I was also that was my first foray into uh North American culture, I would
Mm-hmm.
say. And I was coming from a place again, like I was coming from a country and a place where people kind of pride themselves on being like very blunt and very honest with all the caveats
Mm.
that that brings. It's you'll get feedback in France and it's going to be like, this sucks, this needs to change, you need to fix
Yeah,
this, blah blah blah, and you will not get a compliment on what you did right. You will
yeah,
only be told what you did wrong.
yeah, it's true. Mm-hmm.
Which makes the process faster because you're like,
Yeah,
okay, I know what to fix, but also can get at you a little bit sometimes, especially when you're an artist and you spend a lot of energy on something. It's like, okay. So it
yeah,
toughens you up a lot, and I'm not sure how I feel about that, to be honest. I feel like there's a healthy middle. And so
yeah.
when I moved to Canada and started working on American productions and Canadian productions, I found out that the way feedback was given was it was so different from what I'd been used to that I felt like everything I did was okay all the time. Because all I
Mm.
heard was, this is great, this is amazing, blah, 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 blah. And it's like that compliment sandwich thing where
Mm.
they tell you so much, like a lot of like little positive things. And then you have to kind of scour through the feedback to figure out
Yeah.
uh, what you actually need to change.
Yeah,
And so being French, I was very annoyed because I was like, oh, we're spending like I'm sitting here listening to like I'm just like yeah okay, it's great, it's tell me what we need to do, like tell me what we need to change. And
yeah,
I kept telling people, you can be honest with me, you can tell me. And um eventually I realized, it's like it's not up to them to be honest with you, it's up to you to adapt to
yeah,
the work culture and in general the culture, and understand that you can't ask them to
yeah.
do it the French way. They're Canadian or they're American, and you have to adapt to that. So, like I was saying earlier, the it's interesting thing. When I first came in, I was like, "Oh, cool, it's interesting." And now, when I hear that, no, I'm like, "Okay, so what's wrong? What do we need to fix?"
Mm-hmm.
um,
There's also a
but
thing, I don't
mm,
know if you've noticed, but there's a thing sometimes when you're like, I don't know, when you notice that there's something that's not working, but you're not the person in charge, you can't
mm,
bring it up.
oh yeah,
I don't
you
know if you've
can't.
noticed that.
You
Yeah, where it's
cannot.
like, whereas in France, it's not a problem. It's like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, this thing's not working because of that. And people are like, yeah. And then they're like, here's how we're gonna fix this. But you
Mm.
don't do that at all here. It's like a big
No.
no
Yeah,
no.
the hierarchy here, for better or worse, is a lot more like set in stone.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like, um, to be honest, like personally, I prefer it because I like to know where I stand.
Mm.
Um, if things are vague, I feel like it's an open door to, like just I don't know how to say that. It makes me confused. I like the structure. It does get
Mm-hmm.
frustrating though, because sometimes like it would be so easy to fix if you and you're like, no.
Yeah.
It's the not my circus, not my monkeys. It's like,
Yeah.
you don't say it. Um and to that point, um when I moved to Canada, so after the graphic design stint job,
Mm-hmm.
I started working at a studio, an Australian studio that had a studio in Vancouver called Animal Logic.
Oh yeah. They're
Yeah,
pretty big.
yeah, and so I think they recently got bought, bought out by Netflix.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
Yep.
Back when I was there, I was working on the Lego Movie 2, the sequel. They've done all the Lego movies basically.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that was my first experience in feature and as a viz dev artist, which I thought at that point in my career, I was like, this, I had kind of given up on this dream.
Mm.
Because I was like, I don't feel like that's in the cards for me, and I'm just gonna try things until I figure out, like, what I enjoy doing for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I had avoided trying to look into feature because a thing that kept coming back in my previous work experience is that I got bored like
Mm.
6 or 7 months in on the job,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, oh my god, this so like I was just doing like the same thing every day. It was repetitive. As a little note, I got diagnosed with ADHD
Okay, that
like
makes
a couple
sense.
years ago, and I was like, oh, now that I look back, I'm like, it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, feature typically runs a lot longer. Like it's like years, and like I don't know that I can do years on the same thing. Like that's for
Yeah.
sure not gonna be a great thing. And I could not have been more wrong about something. Because
Oh
once I
yeah.
got started on that, I was just like, oh, this is great. Oh my gosh, this is what I was meant to be doing. And I finally felt like I fit in. Like finally the skill set that I had
Mm.
matched what was asked of me. It's just like a
Mm-hmm.
lot of creative thinking, a lot of like, I'm giving you solutions to like this or that, and very varied tasks. Because when you say viz dev or like concept artist, I feel like it's such a broad term, and
Mm-hmm.
the view of what that means, as an artist, is a little bit skewed because you look at art of books or I
Yeah.
don't know, behind the scenes and stuff, and you see all those like swanky concept paintings and stuff, and you're like, oh wow, that's so hot. Like they do paintings, it's cool. And it's a lot, like I would say 90% of your time as a vis dev artist is just like someone saying, we need a design for a tree in this scene. Can you draw like
Mm.
15 trees and we'll figure out which one fits the best and we'll model it. And so that's just 90% of your job is doing like little things, is like figuring out like a location um for a scene. And honestly, 10% is swanky painting.
Yeah.
And they're cool for the art of books, but most of the time, like that's not really what you need. um and yeah, so I did viz dev on that movie because they're Lego characters, so the character
Mm.
design on that is is very minimal. It's like, I'm gonna change a wig. It's uh but it was really fun. And the production designer that I worked with on that film, his name's Patrick Hennenberger.
Mm.
And so he's a German guy. And so I was back to like
Ah,
working with a German person again. And I actually really enjoyed it because he was very straightforward.
yeah.
And I really liked that. I was like, oh yes, give me that straight feedback. I know exactly what to do. No niceties, just do this. The directors want to see this, and you're like, okay. And then so you draw it. Um, I had a blast on that film. They wanted me to draw, so I was like, so am I supposed to draw like Lego? They're like, no, we really like, so they really, the directors of that movie really liked Mary Blair.
Mm.
Um and that's if you are in the US, if you're a Disney fan, if you work in the industry, you've heard that name before. I feel like
Oh
that's
yeah.
like a reference that's thrown around so much, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, okay, Mary Blair, here we go. So that's kind of what I did for like a good, I don't know if it was a year or like 10 months. I can't remember, but it's just like a blast. I was having so much
Yep.
fun. Um and then after that, I stayed in the same studio and we pivoted to working on DC Super Pets,
Mm.
with a different production designer, different art directors, different team, like um and completely different project because that was a DC IP, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um and they also, I remember back then, so I was working on the work permit, and immigration was something that was very scary to me.
Yeah.
um because I think I didn't mention that, but the whole reason that I settled for Canada too is that it is a lot easier to immigrate to as a French artist than it is to immigrate to the US.
Yeah.
uh I know you were doing your you had an O1 at the time, right? When
Yeah.
you
Mm-hmm.
were, so yeah, when we met, we were both in France, and then you were in the process of getting your O1 visa to move to the US.
Yeah.
And it seemed grueling. It's
It was a
just
lot. It's a lot of work because it's like it's a lot of work because nobody wants to do the work. So you're like
mm,
you have to be the one to ask. You need
yeah.
like 10 recommendation letters, and it's kind of hard because you need to find people. I mean, I knew a lot of people in France, but you have to find
mm,
people that have like a weighty name to them. So
mm,
I actually got really lucky. One person from DreamWorks was like, okay, yeah, I'll do a letter for you, which I'm like so thankful for her. Like, because having DreamWorks, like someone who works at
mm,
DreamWorks, be like, yeah, here's a letter for your visa. It's like it helps so much because people know the name. So
Yeah.
stuff like that is like really but yeah, and then it's like you have to compile all of your grades from all of your like
Oh my gosh, yeah, that's
school, and then like not only just university but like school also. You have to
mm-mm.
compile so much of that stuff. It's just like and then you have to like write why you're so much better. It's the
It's so
worst.
weird. It's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna gas myself up, and it's
Yeah, it's the hardest thing. It's really tough. Yeah. And it's also like yeah.
Mhm.
And you have to put the dates for everything. You're like, I started on this date, and like it's like,
Oh
man, I don't remember. So you have to like look through all your paperwork just so it's like, oh yeah, I did start on that show on like September
mhm.
15th,
Yeah.
2015 or something. I don't know.
It's the amount of paperwork and stress is just
Yeah.
unbelievable, and that's I imagine that most of your audience or your listeners are U.S. based. Um, but for people who are not, it is worth knowing that if you weren't born a U.S. citizen, if you're like from any other country and your goal is to work in the American industry or in the U.S., um, you will most definitely need a diploma. You'll need an education, like
Yeah.
a higher
Yeah,
education.
yeah.
You need
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you need a degree. I was looking for the word.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah, yeah.
because that's you need it for immigration purposes.
Yeah,
That
exactly. Yeah.
and it sucks because education can be pricey, but that's the
But it's
reality
better
of
in
it.
France than it is in
It
the
is.
US.
It
Yeah.
is.
Honestly, if anyone's listening right now, like especially during the recession and stuff,
Oh my gosh.
you would have it would be much better. I mean, if you want to get a full diploma and stuff, I would probably look into schools in France or in Europe because
Mm,
they're so much cheaper and you get the same education. The only thing is that you don't get the same networking, but I
yeah.
feel like you can network on the internet. I don't know if you need to spend like a hundred
Yeah.
thousand
I mean,
dollars extra
yeah.
for the networking aspect. I don't know.
Yeah, to be transparent again. So I did like a full 5 year cursus in France in a private school because a lot of we have a lot of really good public animation schools in France, but for example,
Mhm.
Gobelin and Superfocom, correct me if I'm wrong, but they're both private, right? Because Gobelin
Yeah,
you have to pay too.
yeah. Gobelin
Um,
used to be semi-private, but now it's like full
it's full
private. Yeah,
private now,
yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
so back when I enrolled is '09, yeah, and
Mm,
the full 5 years was I think about 30K,
yeah, which
which
is
is
not
a
that bad.
sum. It's comparatively to what I've
Yeah,
heard tuition is like in the US, it's peanuts. It's nothing.
yeah.
And
So you would pay for a 1 year of school, but
yeah.
your diploma is worth money
Mm,
wise 1 year of school in the US.
yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the where were we? So yeah, mm, hang on.
We were talking about how you need a diploma for immigration.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, back to diplomas and immigration and stuff. So I was at the time still on a work permit, and that work permit meant that I was only allowed to stay in Canada and work in Canada with the company that sponsored me, which was Animal Logic. And so what was happening as we were moving from the Lego movie sequel and going into DC Super Pets is that there was no guarantee that I wouldn't be released or like let go.
Mm,
And I
yeah.
remember being told, well, we don't, and it was fair. In all fairness, like I had spent just a year doing like Mary Blair style, very flat, 2D painterly paintings for this movie. And so for the following project, which was, completely different, they were like, I don't know if you can fit the style of this project, but if there's one thing that you know about me is that I I love trying out different styles. I want to try as many things as possible. I like diversifying. I just like, you know,
Yeah.
um trying out things. And so I was like, okay, well, that's fair. I just like, give me a chance, give me a shot. And so they gave me an assignment. Like, I think someone came to me and like, oh, they need like a couple designs for um I think it was Wonder Woman,
Mm.
and it was just her, I think. It was just her. They were like, oh, we want like a couple designs for Wonder Woman. Like, we're throwing you a bone. Like, let's see what you hit with that. And so in my head, thinking of my work permit, thinking of the fact that I very much wanted to stay in Canada and not
Mm.
be let go, I was just like, oh, these designs need to be amazing. Like, it's just like so much weighing in the balance. I was like, oh, I need to stay here. And so I gave it everything. It's just like, I came up with like, I don't know, 10, 12 different designs. Um, and then I showed them in the director review, and I remember like my hands were shaking. I was 28, okay? I
Mm.
wasn't, I was, but I was still just as nervous as when I first started my career. It's just hands shaking, full on like sweating, it's just like anxiety to the max in that meeting, dead silent with the directors who were in LA, calling in like on Zoom or something. And so I'm sharing my work and I'm pitching it. And I'm like, okay, so these are like a couple designs. I don't remember what I said. I think I blacked out. I was just, those are the designs. And they were quiet for a good 35 seconds,
Oh
which
my
was
god.
terrifying. I was like, oh my God, they hate it. I experienced the full scope of human emotion. I was like, oh my God, it's over for me. I'm gonna have to find another job. I was just already like, thinking like that, doomsday prepping, basically. And
Yeah.
like, and they're like, I don't know what to say. These are all super cool. And I was like, oh yes, thank God. And so we got off on the right foot based off of
Mm-hmm.
those designs. And I ended up like staying on that project as a vis dev artist and a character designer. I was not the character lead on that movie.
Mm.
I was kind of, I had a weird situation because typically if you're a character designer, that's what you do. Like, that's your job. You character design. And if you're a vis dev artist, you're a vis dev artist. And I was a little bit of both. So
Mm.
sometimes I'd get pulled on assignment, like, no, like, we need Marion in Viz Dev, or no, we need Marion in like character design. We need her to do like a few concepts for this, or like costumes for this and that. And so uh I ended up like doing so much on this movie, in the sense that like I varied stuff. I mean, like, it's just,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I was drawing plants, sometimes I had a building to design, sometimes I was just like, hey, do you want to think about the color palette for like the generics of this film? So it's just really good as a work experience, because it's basically me like stretching uh my artistic abilities as far as I could take them, because it's just going in so many different directions. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's just,
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like you had like finally the opportunity to like try a ton of new stuff all the time.
yeah. And
That's really cool.
also, I was still working, like, I was working with the same team of artists that I was working with on Lego. So at that point, we all knew each other pretty well, and is again, it was also a small team. Um, and it is worth saying that, while our art director, one of our art directors for sets, was a woman, all of the Viz Dev artists in Vancouver in the studio were men, and I was
Mm.
the only female Viz Dev artist on the team
Mm,
for about almost 2 years.
oh wow.
And yeah, and the team I worked with, the guys were absolutely lovely. They were great. We like worked together pretty seamlessly. I learned so much from them. It was honestly, it was one of the best time I've had on on any project in a studio. It was lovely, and I think if it weren't for that experience, I would not I would not be where I am today. I think. Um,
What do you mean in terms of like all the knowledge that you've learned, or
yeah,
also
and
like
also confidence because
mm,
when I started on Lego, I had come off of like TV and graphic design, all things that don't really pertain to they're not the same industries really. I mean, TV
mhm,
maybe, but it's the the vibes to put it that way. The vibes are completely different, and what is expected of you is also different. Um,
mm,
and so I wasn't really confident, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I don't know, like do I deserve this? Um, and then at that point, I had been asked to draw like I don't know, like a lot of different artists, like a lot of different styles. There's just, like it was always like, oh, we need like this to look like this, like we need this to look preschool, we need this to look like this, like that. And so I didn't know who I was as an artist anymore because I had been asked to draw always like someone
mm,
else or to fit something
mm,
specific, and that wasn't necessarily in line with um my own style preferences.
mhm.
And so I didn't know who I was. And so the first few assignments that I got on Lego, I was just trying to draw like, I was like, oh, how do they want me to draw? Like, I don't know. Like, who should I match? And there's just like, looking like a little panicked. And then the production designer, uh, like just sat me down and we looked at my portfolio together, like after work. Well, like, like yeah, after work. I think it was after work. I was like, yeah, I'm sorry, like Patrick, I'm not sure that I know what you want me to draw like. And he's like, well, draw like you. I was like, okay, but even in my portfolio, if you look at it, it's a lot of different styles. So I don't know what you think I am like as an artist. And so we looked at my portfolio together, and he pointed a few things that he really liked, and he was like, this is the stuff that made me hire
Mm.
you. And I was like, oh. And he's like, I don't need you to be anyone else. I just need you to be you. And
Oh.
after he said that, I was like, it just gave me I was like, okay, I'll try to be me. And then I just started drawing, and I got like a lot of positive feedback. And it just slowly, like, brick by brick, built back my
Mm.
confidence to the point where it's like, yeah, I think yeah, VizDev is the place for me. This is where I can see myself growing. Um, and it was, like the collaborative aspect of it too was just something that I really enjoyed. And um, yeah, I was like, oh, okay, this is it for me. And that's what I've been doing for the last couple of years.
That's really cool. I love that. I feel like it's cool to hear that also, when you start a career, you don't have to find your perfect
Mm,
fit right off the
mm,
bat, and it might take a little bit, but it's
yeah,
okay for it to take like a little bit. I think that's really great. And sometimes also to figure out like, it's okay for you as an artist to be like, hey, maybe like this place in the industry is like not for me. Like, you
yeah.
know, something
Uh,
that like for example, for me, probably something I shouldn't be saying in public, but I don't care. Like, I don't know if feature is the right place for me. Like, I feel like TV is
mm,
much more fun and straight to the point. You get a lot more ownership over your work in boards
yeah,
than you do in feature. So, like stuff like that, it's kind of cool to try it out and see.
absolutely. and we've had this conversation before, you and I, where you were
Yeah.
justly saying that, you yourself have tried, like, you've tried TV, you've tried feature, um and TV is where you felt like you shone a little bit more, like you were shining in TV.
Feature
And
pays so much better though.
I know.
That's what
I
sucks.
know.
It's
Oh
like,
my god.
yeah, it's just like feature. You have to be a yes man. You have to just be like,
Yeah.
yep, 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 yep.
Yep,
Anything you
yep.
say, I'll do it. I'll
Mm-mm.
do it. And it's like, god damn it. Like in TV, you have more agency. So,
Yeah.
but you
Yeah.
know,
I can
tighter
see that.
deadlines, pay
Yeah,
cut.
mm, the pay cut is, oof,
Yeah,
sheesh.
but
Um
um, but it's like it's kind of interesting to think about in terms of uh yeah, like as an artist, like your journey, you don't have to start your journey where it's gonna end. You can kind
yeah.
of like have
Yeah.
that path where like you meander a little bit, you kind of like try
Mm-hmm.
out things and stuff. I think that's really cool.
Honestly, like, it's just, if you have the opportunity to do it, like, try it. Like, if you're not sure, it's better to try and be like, well, that wasn't quite for me and stuff. Like, like I said that earlier, but I get the sense that I started my career backwards with, like, those a job that felt very big, like a little bit too big for my shoulders at the time, where it's just, asked to give directions and make decisions, and I at the time I was not prepared for it. I still learned a lot from it. Like, I don't regret the decisions I've made. Like, even if the job was frustrating at times, every job's frustrating at times. It's just,
Mm-hmm.
in my experience, I just stay in the jobs that, like, the frustrations I can deal with. I'm like, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah.
it's never like, I think there's like this very, I would say it's toxic, the myth that, like, uh if you work like a passion job, and if you work in the art industry, you're not gonna work a day in your life and it's gonna be roses and it's gonna be perfect and blah, blah, blah. It's never gonna be perfect.
No, yeah, that's not
um
true. I
and
agree because I feel even yeah. Oh, oops, sorry for cutting you off, but I feel like I even though even in like TV, I say I love TV, but it's a lot of work. But I would rather work hard on something I'm like passionate about
mhm.
rather than work a lot less where I feel like my hands are a little tied. So that's like
Yeah.
those are things that as an artist are things that you need to figure out about yourself because it's like
Mhm.
that's really a personality thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like how do I fit in that, like, because like you said, like what kind of frustrations am I okay with, like, because it is frustrating sometimes to like work like long hours, but are
Mhm.
those hours, I'm at the end of the day when I'm going to bed, am I like happy with the day that I spent?
Yeah, one thing I'll say about the way that I work now, compared to when I first started out, is, like, when I first started out, I felt like I had so much to prove.
Oh
Um
yeah.
I was,
Mm-hmm.
like, in anime, when, like, in shonen anime, when the protagonist is just like, I will show them, I will become, like, the next great thing. And it's just like, that was totally my mindset when I was 19. I was like, yeah, I'm gonna work hard, and then, like, work harder than everybody. It was just so silly to think like that. Like, now, uh I just, I sit on my desk. Actually, that's a lie. I don't sit at my desk. I sit on my couch because I don't work from my desk. I work from home. But I work on from my couch, which, don't do that. My physio hates me. But so I sit at 9 a.m. I look at what it is that I need to be doing for the day. I do what I need to be doing. And then come the end of the day, I clock out. I don't think about it. I don't think, I'm just
Yeah.
like, it's my job. It's what I do for a living. I'm passionate about it. I care about it during the allocated time. I
Yeah,
will
that's really
not
important. Yeah.
do overtime unless it's absolutely necessary because we're like, crunch happens. Even in art, it happens,
Mm.
unfortunately. In a production, it's just, um, yeah, if I don't. I don't work past the time that I'm supposed to be working. I don't need to prove anything to anybody. I'm serious about the job and I'm passionate about it. And I know that, and the people I work with know that, and that's enough.
I think
Um,
that's great. That's a great outlook. I think it does take a little bit of time to kind of like get to that mindset, to find that
mm,
like, sweet spot, right? Like to be like, okay, yeah, I feel like I know what I'm
yeah.
supposed to do. I'm confident in what I'm supposed to turn in. And
Mm-mm.
yeah.
And
Let's oh yeah, were you gonna say something?
I forgot. I'm sorry. I was like, oh, I have something to say, and then I forgot. That's happens to me
uh
15 times a day. Sorry.
I was gonna say let's jump into some questions. We have some really good
Oh
questions for
yeah.
this episode that I think are gonna be really fun to
Mm-hmm.
answer. From our patron, Brother to Drummer.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of like went over this a little bit through the episode, but maybe we can kind of like summarize that again a little bit. What do you think American studios do well compared to others? And what do you wish American studios did that others do?
Um, I feel like American studios are really good at uh building you up. Like in the sense that the way that feedback is given is a lot gentler. Um so when you're an artist, you don't completely feel dejected when you get back to your desk after a review.
Yeah.
um and I don't know, it's a hard question. Like, how do you feel about it? Because I know I could pinpoint the differences between like a French studio and an American one, but I don't know how I feel about them, to be honest, because I feel like
Mm,
there's good in both and there's like limits to both systems. For example,
yeah,
um one of
I
my
guess.
top frustrations after working with like a few American studios is that um that like you're gonna get notes from executives, from like higher ups, blah blah blah, and you're getting notes from like a ton of people, like creative notes, I mean. and
Yeah,
and
yeah. Hmm.
and so sometimes like, so this doesn't, I'm not uh, I'm trying to be as American as I can saying this.
Diplomatic, yeah.
Yeah, but not
I
in
think
a, not in a bad way. It's just like I'm trying to get the point across. It's just like, when you watch an animated movie, like a Hollywood one, I mean, like,
mm,
American animation, and you're like, you look at the art of book. You're like, what
mm,
happened? Like those designs were so cool, and how did we end up here in the movie? The designs sometimes feel a little bit watered down, and it's it's not necessarily the artist's fault or like the production designer or like the director or whatever. It's just like there are a lot of people giving feedback
yeah.
because, and I could be wrong, this is my understanding, is like I am just a clog in the chain, like in the machine,
Mhm.
but my understanding of it is that on a movie like this with a budget like that, because they're big budget movies,
Yeah,
uh you have a lot riding on that movie financially.
yeah, yeah,
And so the people who like, it's just it's an investment and they want to see a return on that investment. And so they
yeah,
can't take risks too
yeah,
much.
yeah.
Like, they're like, how many times have I heard the sentence like, "Oh, we're going to make something completely different and new and cool and exciting," only to end up with something that's like just a little bit left field of like a classic Disney movie style wise.
Yeah.
And that's a risk. That's already a risk. And it's nobody's fault, but like the way that the industry works, it's just like,
Yeah, because they're
because
like, that's also the thing is like, I don't know. I think people tend to forget like these studios are like publicly traded companies and they
yeah,
have stocks, and it's not just the CEO, it's also like the
yeah,
shareholders. So
exactly. And so
it's like so many people. Yeah.
yeah, and like, it's it is what it is. That's my biggest frustration as an artist, because like, everyone everyone on the production, from like, like, the not the bottom of a food chain, but like from like top to bottom, everyone's trying to do their best. Everyone believes in the movie that they're working on, and they're trying to get this movie done, and done beautifully, and they put everything they have in it. Never think that that's not the case. It's just like people are just trying their best, and unfortunately, like, in the US, you have to make money off of that film,
Yeah.
so that trumps a lot of like artistic
Yeah.
decisions, I feel like. Meanwhile, in France, it's like the opposite, where it's like there's no money at all.
Yeah.
And that's a huge problem, because sometimes movies are like in development hell for like years, and they're beautiful, and they're like, sometimes like the art style, you're like, I've never seen these before. Like, I remember when I still lived in France, they were developing a movie called Long Way North from
Oh yeah.
Rémi
Yeah, yeah,
Chaillet.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
when I saw the work that they were doing on that movie, like, my third eye opened. I was just like, wow, like, I had never seen like colors like that used in that way. I was just like, oh, this is amazing. I was just
Yeah.
fascinated. And that movie came out, I think, like, I don't know how many
Not that
years
long
later.
ago.
Yeah, not that long ago. And not a lot of
2015.
people outside of Europe, I would say, have seen it. I don't think. I
I think
mean,
that's the main thing that
yeah.
is hard. I was the main reason why I moved to the US was just like I'm tired of working on stuff that nobody's looking at, you know? Like it's
Yeah.
like I oh it's like you give your so much of your time
Mm-hmm.
and energy into things that it's not that they don't matter, but a lot of people don't watch them, and it's like, and it's
Yeah.
not anybody's fault. It's just it's just a distribution is just
Yeah.
much smaller, and
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of it's nice to work on a thing and people are like, oh yeah, I know this thing.
Yeah. It's it's frustrating for sure. Like, that's gonna be the keyword for
Yeah.
this episode. But um I don't know if you've had that conversation before, because we're both French. I frequently discuss the state of the animation industry as a whole, like,
Yeah.
between France and the US, like, with both like French artists and like peers from back home, and people in the US. And sometimes I get into little tiffs with
Hmm.
like French friends, because they jokingly call me a sellout. Um
Yeah, 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 I
for
know what you mean. No, for real. Yeah, for real. Yeah, yeah. It's the same thing with comics people who go in animation. Like people who stay in comics, they're like calling the
mm,
animation people sellouts. Yeah, yeah. It's just
and it's
it
like
is kind of true. Yeah.
well, I at some point, like, first of all, I don't think that's again, like, when I talk about this, I talk about this with friends, and it's a joke. Like, there's no like real meaning behind it.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
it's like, it's just because I'm telling you this, but then the answer I usually give them is like, well, like, I I like having a nice apartment, and also like I like people seeing the movies that I work on.
Yeah, it's
So it's like, you jab at me, I jab right back. But um it is something like I felt in the recent years. I felt I found myself wishing that I could work on a French film, with what that entails in terms of like the art direction of it. It's just something that's not necessarily like catered to like a massive audience.
Broad.
A broad audience. Like like a movie like that, but with the budget of an American film, which cannot happen. And I've had this conversation this summer with like someone who actually is a peer from France who's co-directing her first feature, and she was saying, I used to wish that too, but as soon as there's money involved, there's also like expectations, and so that would simply not be possible, because the more money you put in, the more you need like that mass appeal. And again, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Mass appeal is not a bad thing. Like trying to, sorry.
Yeah, it's just that it's a specific style. It's just if you're trying to please the masses, you have to fit within a specific style. There's a reason why the top chart songs, like pop artists, sound a specific way. It's because it's a sound that has been kind of like proven through, to like be pleasing to the ear. It makes you feel good. It's all these things that's like that's an easy sell. And it's the same thing for animation. It's like you have to, there's some stuff that everybody agrees, like a Disney movie, the characters look cute. They're really cute. Like no one's gonna say that a Disney character is not
they're
cute.
Successful for for a reason. It's not coming out of nowhere. And
exactly.
And it's not, it's not necessarily a bad thing. But from an artist's point of view, if you want to explore and you want to experiment, it can feel stifling, right?
Yeah, because it's one style, because it's like one very specific. It's like it's kind of like when you look at anything that's huge. It's like there's a reason why some shapes are like more appealing than others, and that's why there's like all these. But it's kind of like that. I always bring it back to the Aesop fable with the wolf and the dog, and it's that thing where it's like this wolf is like starving, and he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna try to grab this chicken from this house or whatever." But then there's like this dog that's like, "No can do," and he's like, "But if you want to be fed and well taken care of, you could be here in this house." And the wolf was like, "Oh, really? Oh, so it's pretty good. What's the catch?" And then he like sees that the dog has like a collar, and then he's like, "Yeah, you just it's just you have to stay here all the time." He's like, and the wolf is like, "No, I'm a free spirit," and he like runs away, but he's still starving. So it's like pretty. It's like that thing, right? Like. But you're talking about like the animation industry landscape, and I don't know, man. I feel like a lot of indie people are meeting some kind of success that, through like YouTube channels, TikTok, and like all of that stuff. And I don't know, it's really interesting because I feel like a lot of studios right now, like we're hitting a big recession. A recession. I don't know.
Yeah.
I feel like people are gonna play it safe. People are gonna be like, let's just kind of do IPs. So maybe but people still want to watch content, and they're finding the content they want to watch on like YouTube and stuff. So
I think that's what's interesting is like this industry and the way that we look at content is constantly shifting. And I'm really interested to see where it's gonna go.
Yeah.
To be honest, but dang it, I was thinking of something. Yeah. Sorry.
Oh no, yeah, go ahead.
Cut that off. I was thinking of something and I forgot. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
Let's
see. Yeah. I was just gonna bring up some other questions real fast that are pretty cool. If you can answer this one, I don't know how you're feeling about it. From @Eldraws, what was your favorite character you designed that never made it to final production?
Well, not to play the old, like, oh, sorry, I signed an NDA, but I did sign a bunch of NDAs. That being said,
Yeah.
you know, there was a character that I was asked to design once, that I really enjoyed drawing them. They were like a teenager, um, and uh, I got like the leeway to explore, like, go really far out with it, and just have fun, like, with the whole concept. It was such a good time, and I was so passionate about them, and unfortunately they ended up being cut. I could, you watch a screening of the movie and you're like, yeah, it's too convoluted, there are too many plot lines in this movie, something's gonna get cut. You just know it, like when it's the first few screens, you're like, one of those plot lines gotta go. And they ended up getting cut because the movie needed to focus on something else. And I was like, yeah, that is fair. But I still think that that plot line and that character, sorry, I can't say more than that, but it's just like very passionate about them, and I could see myself as a teenager relating to them a lot, and I wish that they had stayed in the movie, but it wasn't their movie, and they were taking too
much space.
Too much space, unfortunately. So I was like, who knows? Maybe one day they'll make a movie about them, and that'll be cool.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Yeah. That's
that makes sense.
That's a frustration of that's something that I wanted to say earlier and I forgot, but it's just, again, like 90% of your work as a visitor artist or a character designer is gonna go straight to the trash can. You have to accept that very little of what you do ends up, one, being useful, two, being used. It's and it doesn't mean that you're failing. You just have to accept it and not be too precious with your work. And that's something that I learned as the years went by, and now I'm just like, I used to have this like really strong emotional attachment to characters or concepts or anything that I produced in a professional setting, to the point where when I got feedback, it was sometimes hard to hear because, it was like I held it so close to the chest. It was so precious to me. And so I would take it almost personally. It's like someone telling you like, oh, your child is ugly, and you're like, what? Not my baby. And eventually, like, you have to learn that. You have to learn to let it go, and at first I had to remember, like, they're not saying that you're bad at your job, that you're shit, or that, like, they're not, this is not a reflection of you. This is just this design, this thing that you produced does not fit with what the director had in mind, which is very different. Because your job as a vis dev artist is to execute like someone else's vision.
Yeah.
Because they're explaining, like, typically, I don't know if that's interesting or not, but like typically when you're a vis dev artist or a character designer, and you start on an assignment, you get briefed either by the art director, the production designer, sometimes the directors are present, and basically you're being explained like, okay, we need say, like, I don't know, I'm trying to find an example. I don't know, we're working on a film and we need a character design for a ghost in a haunted mansion. And so during the brief, the directors, or like whoever's briefing you, whoever's in the room, usually pulls up references and stuff, like photo references or like movie references or whatever like the directors are thinking of, like with this character, and like it can be like a little scene if it's already boarded or whatever. You're giving a lot of materials basically, and a lot of verbal cues and stuff, or just explanations, and then it's up to you to take all of that information, all of what you've retained, like if they're saying like, oh, I want them to be spooky, but like, I don't know, like Casper the Ghost spooky, not like Guillermo del Toro spooky, and you're like, okay, gotcha, all right. And so it's, you take all of this information and then you're thinking, okay, so how do I change that into something that they want to see? How do I make their vision into like a drawing? And to me, that's the most interesting part of the job, is just having to think, having to figure out. It's like a riddle. It's when I was a kid, I was really obsessed with like Agatha Christie. Yeah. Sorry, I'm trying to remember how to pronounce it. Yeah. I was obsessed with her novels and like with Poirot and stuff, and like the whodunit. And I was always like thinking, like watching TV or like reading. I was like, who did this? Like what? And I was always like trying to figure out stuff. And so that's the funnest part for me. It's not even drawing anymore. It's just thinking, okay, how do I do this? How do I get their vision across? Like, how do I turn this string of words into a drawing? And it's just, it's a lot of fun, honestly. Even though, come director review, you show your stuff, you show like all the options, and you're like, hey, so here are like 5 ghosts that I designed based on the information that you gave me. And then you get, it's interesting. And you're like, damn it, I didn't hit it. Okay, back to the drawing board. But usually that's the process, like you show them stuff and then they're like, it makes them think in return, like, oh, this is not how I pictured it in my head. And usually it clears up what they don't want to do, which is equally as important as, figuring out what they do want to do, because this way you don't lose time drawing. But that means that you have like a couple rounds of like designs. I remember one design for a character took, but this is not the norm, but I remember a character design, and I wasn't in charge of that design, but the character itself changed about 998 times. There were 998 versions of the same character across like a year or two, I think. It's just so much work, so many versions. Like, obviously, at some point, you're just, like, pulling your hair out and thinking, I cannot stare at this any longer. And, that's the game, though. So
that's how it works, for real.
Yeah.
I was gonna jump to the next question from Grave Robert, at Grave Robert on Twitter. What would be a good starting point if you want to learn color theory? Also, who's your biggest inspiration when it comes to color?
Ooh, that's a great question. I don't know. Growing up, I was always very scared of color. So all my drawings were like pencil drawings. And I only started color when I was in art school. And back then, it was like Tumblr era, like peak Tumblr, So so I was on Tumblr like scrolling, and that's how like I sort of like, before that I was on DeviantArt. That's all how old I am. But so I was on Tumblr and I was seeing like all those colors, and I think I kind of learned from that a lot. But strictly speaking, I think I was always more inspired by live action filmmaking, in terms of how they use color as a narrative device. So like, for example, like films from like Jacques Demy or like Wong Kar-wai and uh Pedro Almodovar also. Like they all, like the cinematography uh they use as like such like vibrant colors. And I remember like being young and being very inspired by that, and trying to recreate that within my art. So for color theory, honestly, I had classes in art school and I did not retain any of them. Like I'm very sorry. I was just like it never made sense to me. And the first time it clicked is when I was looking at this book called Color and Light, I believe. I think it's James Gurney. It's like a really, like, it's, you know, classic book that a lot of people recommend, and it's for a good reason. Because the way that it's explained to me, suddenly I was like, oh, that makes sense. That makes sense. And so I learned a lot from reading that book, but most of the time I learned by copying. Like when I was younger, I was just like, oh, they are putting blue and orange together. I guess those two go together. And so my advice would be to, like, you know, if you want to work in animation and you just watch a lot of animated movies, try to notice, try to pay attention when you're watching a movie, like the colors that they're using for a scene, and thinking, oh, you know, like purple lighting, that's interesting. Why are they doing that? Like, ask yourself questions. To me, that's the most helpful. In terms of references or like artists that I look up to in terms of color, there are like so many. Katsai comes to mind. The way that she uses color in her illustrations is just absolutely out of this world. Jasmine Lay, I am not sure how to pronounce her last name. I'm very sorry. Is also fantastic. And I was talking about this film earlier, but the movie Long Way North was, I think, so instrumental to me in my career in terms of like understanding color. Like I saw the frames and stuff, and I was like, you can do this. You can put like these colors together and it looks so specific. And it was really like, again, like it clicked in my head when I saw this movie. And you know, I also looked at a lot of fine art growing up. Like, you know, like we're very lucky and privileged in France to have a ton of museums that you can go to for free with lots of, you know, art and painting being displayed, sculptures, etc. And again, like this is something I was really privileged to be able to go to those museums, because again, like my parents were teachers, which meant that they had you know, the summer time off, so we typically like go to museums. My mom was noticed that I liked drawing from a young age, and so she was trying to encourage me. So she would like push me and show me art and take me to exhibitions. Back in the 90s, which is when I grew up, she would take me to the first screenings of Ghibli movies in theaters. She wanted me to see basically, you know, not just like French stuff. Basically, just trying to broaden my horizons, which I feel like is very important as an artist. It's not just to look at what's done in your country, especially in the US. Like, you have so many incredibly talented artists in the US, for sure. But you need to look outside of that and look at artists in like South America, or like, you know, in countries that you don't live in, because, you know, for example, a lot of American artists always cite like Mary Blair as a really good inspiration and stuff, but you need to look at what she was looking at, her inspirations, to understand why she got to where she got art wise. Because art doesn't happen, like your style doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's kind of a sum of like your skills, your experiences, etc. And so, like, if you look at her work, she's very inspired by, I believe, I don't want to be mistaken, but I know she's really into, I can't remember if it's South American art, or, and again, that's very broad. I just don't want to butcher my references, so it might be worth looking into. But yeah, you need to look at what, you know, your contemporary artists are looking at, basically, because this is an issue, I feel like, is that if you're just, you know, if you're just looking at one source, and that's a contemporary source, you're kind of depriving yourself from like centuries of experimentation and stuff that's been done before, and you're just essentially like you're continuing to dilute a style, if that makes sense. Again, there's nothing wrong with that, but it is good to understand where things are coming from if you want to find yourself, find your style, and go your own way, I feel like.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's great.
Like,
no, that's a great answer.
You know, if you look at like Cat's Eye's work, Jasmine Lei's work, the way that they use color in their paintings is like, it's not necessarily representing like real life one-to-one. You know, like Cat's Eye, for example, like off the top of my head, uses a lot of greens into her palette. And that's not necessarily like, if I go out and look at the same landscape, it's not necessarily what I'm seeing with my eyes. And I feel like you can trace that back to Fauvist painters almost, you know, like or like, if obviously like this is just one movement, but just the fact that color and light, and that your art doesn't have to depict reality as it is a very important concept to understand. It's just like, yeah, if I want the walls to be pink, the walls will be pink, and like the sun can be blue. I mean, I'm, you know, pushing it, but it's, I think if you look at the landscapes in the Ghibli movie, like the tint of green in the grass and like the blue of the sky, it's so specific, it's so evocative, right? Like, if I'm saying this, I bet like if you've watched a Ghibli movie, you probably see it in your mind, and you look at, I don't know, like a pasture painting from I don't know, any European person, and then the blue's going to be very different, the green's going to be very different, or and it's all perception. It's how, you know, it's, at the end of the day, there are rules that are here to kind of help you at first, and they're entirely based on, you know, I would say cultural upbringing. I don't know if that's the right term, but they're based on, yeah, your education or whatnot, where you live or whatever. And they're good, you know, they're a sandbox to play in, but eventually you can graduate, you can push yourself and graduate and try to play outside the sandbox. I don't know if that makes sense, but
yeah, it's kind of like it is true, it's hard. Color is hard because at first we're like, I gotta do realistic colors, and then it's like, you know, colors don't have to be realistic, but then they still have to make sense together. So it's still kind of like a little bit of an interesting equation there.
It's subjective, to be sure. Sorry.
100%. Well, just like design. This one's a fun question from @Royal Smurf. since you're working on the K-pop movie, who's your favorite K-pop band?
Oh yeah, we didn't even get to touch on that. I had like I wanted to talk about it so much. Not obviously, I can't talk about the project
Yeah.
itself because we're very much developing it. But I'll answer the favorite K-pop group.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to say, like, you know, uh, when I was a student, and it was again like full Tumblr era, I was just like scrolling on like all those Disney artists like blogs and stuff. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this is how I learned about what Visdiv was, and I wanted to become a Visdiv artist because of and I was looking at like Helen Chen's work, Ami Thompson, Mayumi Nose, and I remember finding Celine Kim's blog, and she was doing these like entire projects, like Visdiv projects, like based on like Phantom of the Opera, or like stories that I knew, and then she was like like she was interpreting them
Interpreting
in,
it,
yeah, in her own way, and doing like a whole thing. And I was like, oh my god, this is what I want to do. And I was like, I still like admire these people to this day. I like they're my role models, and also like they also happen to all be women in a field that's still to this day largely dominated by men. And I was like, oh, my dream would be to work with them or for them one day. And then I started working on K-pop, and Helen is my production designer, and Celine is the art director, and Abby was doing character design. So I was like, oh my god! And I ended up working with Mayumi on Super Pet. So I was like, wow! Like I worked with all of my heroes, literally every single one of them, and I think that's very recent. Like I haven't worked on this project for a year yet, and this is when it happened. I was like, I think I made it. Like this is the first time in my life where I felt like I touched the dream. Like that was the dream. And it's even better than I thought it was going to be. That's the thing too, because sometimes like you build something up in your head, and I'm very happy to say that it's not like I'm not disappointed in the least. I'm like, oh, they're not like their profile picture. No, they're absolutely lovely people, and they're so like insanely skilled. It's just like every day I'm just like, oh my god, I need to be better. I need to be a good artist, like deserving. Like that's kind of the mindset. I'm like, no, come on, you're here for a reason. Do the job. Don't stress out. But yeah, it's just like, to me that was like the best thing ever. And to answer your question, my favorite K-pop group is and not to be basic, my favorite K-pop group is BTS.
Nice.
I mean, I listen to a lot of them. I mean, like for work, I just listen to K-pop all day. So it's just I think boy group wise, Stray Kids are really good too. But I listen to a lot more girl groups than boy groups, and I think I'm trying to think of like who I've listened to the most recently. Taeyeon, I think, is just such a good soloist, and girl group wise, I'm more like a Mamamoo type person than and Twice, because they're just classic. I like pop music. So yes, you know all about my K-pop preferences. I just honestly, K-pop is, again, it's such a broad term too. It's just you have every genre of music under the sun, under the umbrella of K-pop, and it's such a beast in itself. It's been really interesting to see how that translates into our movie. Wait, I don't know if I can say that. I don't know if I'm like pushing it with the NDA.
From
But
what you said, it sounds pretty okay.
yeah, okay. Yeah, sorry. It's just
Yeah,
like,
it's just like it's called K-pop Demon Hunter. People know there's going to be K-pop in it.
yeah, yeah, that's true. Oh,
um
yeah.
last question. Let's try to see if you can get a quick 1 or 2 sentence answer to
Oh,
creative block. How do you experience it? And if you do, how did you deal with it?
oh my gosh. 2 sentences for this? Okay.
Yep, yep.
That's my own fault though. I'm too chatty. Uh okay. Let's go. I have absolutely experienced creative block. I think every artist has at some point in their life. My solution for it was, when possible, not to push it. Like when I noticed that I was getting frustrated with my art, or like I just couldn't like draw anything or stuff like that, I was just like, put the pen down,
Yeah.
walk away, literally walk away. It's just, I step away. I take, if it's at work and I have to eventually get back to like a creative mood because, I have to be, I'm paid for it. I take a little walk, I grab a coffee, a beverage or whatever, take a deep breath, and then tell myself, okay, well, when do I need this done for? And then I kind of like work with that. If it's for personal stuff, I just put the pen down and I go like play video games, I watch TV, I read a book, I play music. I do basically any hobby or anything that doesn't involve drawing or thinking creatively. I just, I don't push it because I don't think you should expect yourself to be creative 100% of the time. And, it's again, think it's pretty toxic to just again, to expect yourself to create 24/7 is just, you can't, and you shouldn't have to, and most of the time you don't have to, like, so yeah, go out, have a have a meal with a friend, watch a TV show. I don't know, whatever you enjoy doing, like, that would be my one advice for people who want to get into art and animation in general, is like, find hobbies and stuff to do outside of art, and don't monetize them. Just do them for you. Do it for, like, do something that's not gonna cause you stress, basically. It's just, I think you'd need that. That's my advice.
It's very true. I think that's a great advice. And with this, that's the end of this creative block. Marion, thank you for being our guest and sharing your story. And thanks to our listeners. Follow us on Twitter. It's at Creative Block, creative without the vowels. And Instagram. It's also at Creative Block without the vowels, but there's a dot between creative and block, where we ask for drawing prompts and questions to ask our guests. Huge thanks to our editor Clemens for editing the podcast, Emily for helping us produce the show. If you love our show, then support us on Patreon. It helps us pay for things like Zoom and the Google Drive and all of the expenses and stuff. And if you become a patron, you get early access to interviews as well as bonus episodes. Click on the link in the description of this episode. I've been your host, V. Keep being creative, and we'll see you next week. Bye.